I'm a ranger in a national park. The superiors are hiding something. I won't name any real places or names for my own safety. I never thought that taking the ranger job would change my life, not in the way it did. When I signed on to work at Redstone National Park, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, it was for the peace and solitude. I'd grown up in the area, always loved the wilderness, the smell of pine in the air, the endless miles of untamed beauty. After serving a stint in the military and doing a few years of private security work, I was ready to settle into something quieter. At first, it was exactly what I expected: occasional lost hikers, broken trails to repair, reports of wildlife to handle. But after a few years, the place started to change. Or maybe I just started seeing what was really there all along. I was a ranger for over a decade. I've worked alone in a lot of remote areas, camped out under the stars in places so far from civilization you'd swear you were on another planet. And while I could probably fill a book with the odd things I've witnessed, there are some specific incidents that stand out, things that still haunt me. Let me tell you some of my experiences. About 5 years in, we had a missing hiker case. The guy was an experienced backpacker, familiar with the area. He had checked in with the ranger station before heading out and was supposed to return in 3 days. But he never did. A search party was organized, and I led one of the teams. We scoured the area for days, eventually finding his campsite completely undisturbed. His gear was there, his food, his water, everything. But no sign of him. We searched for a week, but he was never found. The weirdest part? A few months later, another ranger was doing a routine patrol near the campsite and saw him, just standing there in the distance, staring out over the ridge. The ranger called out, but the man didn't respond. When he approached, the figure disappeared, fading into the mist. He swears it was the same guy, down to the clothes he was last seen wearing. We chalked it up to exhaustion, but I never really believed that. There's a small clearing deep in the park where nothing grows. No trees, no grass, just bare earth surrounded by stones. It's off the beaten path, not on any official map, but every ranger knows about it. We don't go there unless we have to. One day I got curious and decided to check it out for myself. I hiked out to the clearing, and sure enough, it was exactly as described. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, each one smooth and weathered, as if they'd been there for centuries. The air inside the circle felt different, heavier, almost like the atmosphere was pressing down on me. I stayed for a while, looking around, trying to figure out if it was some kind of natural formation or if someone had placed the stones there intentionally. After about 15 minutes, I started to feel dizzy, like the ground was spinning beneath me. I stumbled out of the circle, and as soon as I crossed the boundary, the feeling stopped. I've never gone back since, and I advise any new rangers to steer clear of that place. Whatever's going on there, it's not natural. There's a trail in the park that we officially closed off years ago. Too many accidents, people getting lost, some never returning. It's supposed to be blocked off, but every now and then, someone will report seeing it, a narrow dirt path that seems to appear out of nowhere, winding deeper into the forest. A few years ago, I decided to check it out myself. I don't know why, curiosity, I guess. I followed the path for what felt like hours, but no matter how far I went, it just kept going. The trees seemed to close in around me, the air getting colder and thicker. Finally, I turned back, but the way out wasn't where I'd expected it to be. It took me the better part of the night to find my way back to the main trail, and when I did, I found fresh footprints, mine, leading into the woods. But they weren't on the path I had just walked. They led somewhere else entirely. We have a small lake in the park, mostly used by fishermen and the occasional swimmer. It's calm, peaceful, and usually pretty quiet. But one summer, we had a rash of strange sightings, something large moving under the water, bigger than any fish that should be in there. One evening, I was doing a routine patrol near the lake when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a log or debris, but then it moved. Slowly, deliberately. It was massive, whatever it was, far too large to be anything native to these waters. I watched as it disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples behind. Later that night, a group of campers reported seeing the same thing. They described it as a shadow just under the surface, moving silently through the water. We closed the lake for a while after that, but I don't think we ever found out what was really down there. One night I was out on a late patrol when I noticed something odd in the trees. At first I thought it was just wildlife, maybe deer or raccoons, but then I saw them, eyes. Dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness, watching me from the shadows. I shone my flashlight into the trees, but the eyes didn't belong to any animals I recognized. They were too high up, too spread out, and they didn't blink or move. They just stared. For nearly an hour, I stood there, frozen, as the eyes continued to watch me. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. The forest was silent, and I was alone again. I never figured out what those eyes belonged to, but I've heard other rangers talk about seeing them too. Whatever it is, it's out there, lurking in the trees, watching. This was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. I was on a solo patrol late at night when I heard it, drumming. It started faint, like someone tapping on wood, but it grew louder and more rhythmic, like a tribal beat. I followed the sound through the trees, but no matter how far I walked, I couldn't find the source. The drumming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't the sound of any animals I knew of. After nearly an hour, the drumming stopped as abruptly as it started, leaving the forest in complete silence. I never heard it again, but it stuck with me ever since. And then there were the bones. This happened recently, only a few months ago. I was out on one of my usual patrols, checking an area that hadn't been visited in years. It was far from any trails, deep in the forest, where the trees grow thick and the air feels heavier. I was about to head back when I saw something partially buried in the dirt, white, bleached by the sun. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe an elk or deer. But as I dug it out, I realized it was too large. Far too large. The bones were massive, clearly humanoid, but much bigger than any human or known creature should be. The skull alone was nearly twice the size of a normal human's. I took photos, measured them, and immediately reported the find to my supervisor. That's when things got weird. The next day, a team from the Park Service came out and cordoned off the area. They told me not to speak to anyone about what I had found. The bones were classified, and I was reassigned to a different part of the park. A week later, they had removed every trace of the find, and the official story was that it was nothing more than an animal skeleton. But I knew better. I started digging on my own, piecing together information from old ranger logs and local legends. There had been other discoveries like mine, giant bones, strange sightings, disappearances, all quietly swept under the rug. I became obsessed with the idea that something was living in the park, something ancient and intelligent. I started sharing my theories with a few trusted friends, but that's when the real trouble started. It wasn't long after I started investigating that I got a visit. Two men in dark suits, government types, showed up at my door. They didn't have badges, but their authority was clear. They told me, in no uncertain terms, to drop it. They didn't threaten me outright, but their message was clear: stop asking questions, or else. I tried to ignore them, but then things started happening. My apartment was broken into, nothing stolen, just my files on the bones gone. My phone was tapped, and I started seeing strange cars parked outside my place. I realized I was being watched. Finally, I had no choice but to run. I've been living off the grid, moving from place to place, trying to stay ahead of them. But they're still out there, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I can keep this up, but one thing's for sure. There's something in that park. Something big, something dangerous. And the people in charge don't want anyone to know about it. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. But I had to get the story out there, one way or another. Beware the forests. They hold secrets older and darker than any of us can imagine.